We are working for the sixth Sunday after Easter, the Sunday before the Ascension of our Lord. I am David Scaer, and I have been teaching at Concordia Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana for nearly 50 years. I teach both in the area of systematic theology and in New Testament, and I guess my heart is in the New Testament simply because it has to do with Jesus. Now, we'll first begin by reading the pericope, the gospel, the appointed gospel for the sixth Sunday in Easter, which is taken from John 15, 9 to 17. As the Father loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandment and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. This I command you, to love one another. A few introductory remarks about the gospel readings, not only for this Sunday, but for the last few Sundays, and that these are spoken by Jesus in connection with the Last Supper. The Last Supper the supper has come to a conclusion, and that is, this begins in in John chapter 13, where it says in the first verse, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, and it says in verse 2, and during supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments and girded himself with a towel. Now, this indicates that these discourses, and I think this is important to see, that these discourses must be understood as having been spoken by Jesus hours before his arrest, trial, crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. It's amazing that a good portion of this particular gospel has to do with things that happen which Jesus speaks after Maundy, Thursday, and they are discourses rather than particular events. Now, strikingly in this area is that Judas Iscariot is mentioned, even though his dastardly deed does not come into play at this time. And in John's Gospel, Judas Iscariot also, it's not only the historical act of Judas handing over his friend Jesus for betrayal and then eventually death, but Judas Iscariot is the Eucharistic marker in John's Gospel. Now, that's been a debate for some time, and it really should not be debated, that John does have his own his own discourse on the Lord's Supper. And the way that was recognized in the early church is by the intrusion of Judas Iscariot into the discourse. So that in the words of institution with which we are acquainted with, it specifically says, on the night in which he was betrayed. Why that's included? It could be included, one, as an historical marker to indicate when it happened. Two, as a liturgical marker that when you heard Judas, the name of Judas mentioned, it was highly likely that there would be something said about the Lord's Supper, and also as a liturgical as a liturgical marker. The second thing is this, is that the church historically has used the discourses from John in the season between Easter and the Ascension. Now, according to the new pericope system, the appointed gospel for Easter switches between the four evangelists. However, even now we have a new pericope system, which I enjoy very much. It does keep the old church tradition of taking the appointed lessons for the post-Easter season from John's Gospel. It either takes those episodes which in the Gospel follow the resurrection, and that is the appearance of Jesus to Mary Magdalene, the upper room, and where Jesus appoints the apostles to be his successors, and then the Thomas discourse a week later, and then it concludes with the disciples going to the Sea of Tiberias and Jesus appearing them, and Jesus giving Peter the final commission. These other discourses, I am the good shepherd and I am the vine, come before the crucifixion or before the arrest of Jesus. Now, it might seem to be a little bit unusual, but there is something profound going on here, because if there ever was a hermeneutical principle, it had to be the resurrection of Jesus. And that is that what the disciples had heard before the resurrection, they understood completely after the resurrection. And Jesus may have had that in mind here, because if you can psychologize him into what is going on in his mind, I mean, you want to put a time frame on this? It has to be, according to our calendar, late on Thursday night, just before going to the Garden of Gethsemane. He speaks some final words to them, and these have to be understood not only in the sense of what is going to happen to Jesus in his death, but also how Jesus interprets these in light of his resurrection. So when the disciples recalled these words, specifically it is John who recalls these words, the beloved disciple, who has no modesty in keeping himself out of these discourses, what is now prime in their mind is the resurrection. It is not that the resurrection is one event among other events, but this is the event that interprets all things. Also in this regard, and when you look at a pericope like this, there is, I hesitate to say that there might be a Lutheran way of preaching, but there really is no Lutheran hermeneutic, in the sense that one principle applies to each of the Gospels. I think we bind ourselves. We bind at least one hand behind our backs if we begin to operate according to this. John has his own unique way of speaking, of presenting the material. And nothing like this is found in the discourses in John. Nothing is found like this in the Synoptic Gospels. But as mentioned, the code happens to be the person of Judas Iscariot, that indicates that these discourses in some sense have to do with the Lord's Supper. That is how that is identified. Now, this discourse, this is not to render a critique on how the Gospels are laid out, but the discourse for today, or for this particular Sunday, John 15, 9 to 17, is not really a separate discourse, but it's a continuation of the previous one of I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. That all belongs together, because the gospel for this Sunday ends with the fruit that the Christian should bring forth is that we should love, or we are to love other people. Now, without being fully equipped or nearly fully equipped on the discourse for last Sunday about Jesus identifying himself as the vine, a number of things I think have to be said. The first thing is that by saying that Jesus is the vine, he is the true vine. Let's see, is the Greek up there? Yes, just as no, the Greek for that isn't, but that's okay. He says, ampalos he alethene. He is the true vine, which means that all other vines, it's just that so far as Jesus is concerned, there is an eternal quality. He really is the only vine, and not that there are any others. I always found this kind of pericope difficult to fully comprehend until we begin to acknowledge a number of things, and that is that this suggests a vineyard, which pericope happens to be in the other Gospels, especially Matthew and the others, that a certain man planted a vineyard. And the vineyard is really a metaphor for Israel. God has favored Israel. And you remember the Old Testament story that they are promised a land full of grapes. And what that really is a reflection back to the Garden of Eden. And I have mused on this thing whether the tree of life in the Garden of Eden was most likely a vine. If you've had the opportunity to travel in California or in Spain or in Italy or France, even in Germany, not so much in the northern countries, you'll see vineyards, extensive vineyards. And the vineyard in the New Testament is a sign of paradise. Among the Muslims, the sign of paradise is palm trees, water, oasis in the midst of a desert. The corresponding image for Christians is the vineyard, or the vineyard rather, the grapes. And it's amazing that it's amazing that the way we set up our churches liturgically with various symbols grasp something that sometimes we find very difficult or fail to grasp in the scriptures themselves. And that is on the frontal pieces of many churches during this season, and also on the stoles and chasubles of the pastors, there is the symbol of the bread and the grapes. And the grapes always have a meaning, always refer to the Holy Communion, to the blood of Jesus. So when Jesus says, I am the true vine, and that if you abide in him and he abides in you, that's specifically a reference to the Christians abiding in Jesus through the sacrament of the Holy Communion. And that's the reference there. And so we're following up on this Sunday with the reference to Jesus, I am the vine, you are the branches. Now that's not a parable. That's not a parable, it's a reality. But Jesus is speaking in metaphor. Is speaking in metaphors. Some people have because I guess they have mathematical and mechanical minds, they have a difficult time to think in metaphors. And it crosses my mind that Jesus basically is saying here that he's the tree of life. I am the true vine. There is no other source of nourishment for the Christian than the tree of life. And Jesus himself is the tree of life. There's nobody outside. There's nobody outside of him. Now, the pericope, but then you can see that the concept of the Garden of Eden, that the tree of life, then the spies in the Joshua story or in the Moses story, Joshua, they go into the land and they come back with a large selection of grapes, absolutely heavy. The Jews are now entering into their own paradise. And Jesus brings up the concept of paradise again in his reference to the parable of the workers in the vineyard. That's the picture of heaven. Now, the one question was, which is not so carefully laid out in last Sunday's gospel, but which is laid out in this Sunday's gospel, what is the fruit? I really wish that instead of translating the word fruit, which seems to suggest anything from apples to pears to bananas and oranges, mangoes or whatever, it would be better if we could just translate the word grapes, because that's the image that comes forth. And going back to the Genesis story of the Garden of Eden, and that is in that gospel. God plants a garden in Eden. The translation of John 15, verse 1, is not really quite accurate. It doesn't say, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. It says, my Father is the farmer, the Georgos. He is the farmer. Now, with that type of translation, it's easier for us to think back of what God intended man to do in the original creation and how that was going to be continued in the land of Canaan. It was supposed to be a reinstitution of the paradise, and of course it wasn't the reinstitution of the paradise at all. It says he planted cultivated grapes, and we got wild grapes. So Israel never lived up to God's own expectations. And so Jesus comes along. He is the garden. He is the vine. And he acknowledges that the Father is the one, that he is submissive to the Father who does all of these things. Now comes the question for this particular gospel. And we could take a look at this in Greek for those of you who are following along that way. And that is, just as the Father loved me, so I loved you, and you remain in my love. Now that is that is a fantastic statement from this point of view, and that is what it says here, that the intertrinitarian love. How does one person of the Trinity, and you might want to say something about the Trinity in this regard, and you might as well, because the Trinity Sunday is following up very shortly, is that the way the persons of the Trinity interact with one another is love. One loves the other. Now, according to this passage here, according to the words of Jesus, it says that the love with which the Father loved him, that means within the Trinity, this is the love which he loves us. Now, here it's not a universal love, because it says here we are to remain in his love. Now, going down to the next passage here, if you keep my commandments, remain in love, just as I have kept the commandments of the Father, and I remain in his love. Now, I think a number of things have to be pointed out here, because if they don't, that can lead to great misunderstandings. This term here, commandments, has nothing to do with what Lutherans call the law and the gospel. This word, entelos, singular entole, refers to words which are spoken by God regardless of what their content is. This is the word spoken by the majestic and sovereign God. When God speaks, we listen. When God asks us to do something, we do it. The concept to come unto me, all you who labor and heavy laden, is an entole. It's a commandment. Now, at this point here, there's a correlation to what is generally called the Great Commission in Matthew 28, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded. This is not the setting forth of the law. This is the setting forth of divine information that comes from the mind of God. If you keep my commandments, you remain in love, just as I have kept the commandments of the Father, and I remain in love. Now, this puts an entirely different dimension here. If you're going to use the law-gospel categories, and I don't think you should, is that this belongs to the concept of love, simply because God loves the Son, and the Son loves us. And in the Son, since we are in the Son, the Father loves us, and we do the things that the Father does. This really takes us into the inner Trinitarian essence of God, of what God is in himself. Some of our Christians and other denominations speak of the sovereignty of God. That frightens me. I think it's absolutely wrong, because if there's anything that's going to describe God, it's going to be his love. Now, I have spoken to you in verse 11, so that my joy in you and your joy may be fulfilled. It might be better to translate it, may come to its intended purpose. That it is in the love of Christians that Christians have for one another and for all people, the intentions of God are completed. They have come to their conclusion. There's no law here. And then comes the question, I bring this up for this reason, because it says in the gospel for last Sunday, and there's no reason that this should not be mentioned, that if we remain in Jesus and so forth, we will bring forth much fruit. Well, what exactly does that mean, and what's included in that? Well, here this provides the answer, and that is, greater love has nobody that a person lays down his life for his friends. Now, this is an amazing passage here. It could refer to death, that anyone gives up his life. And of course, there would be the meaning of the sacrificial atonement of Christ, his Scaer, his total existence in behalf of his friends. Now, that's an amazing statement too, because Abraham is called the friend of God. Friends really mean a lot. There's a student here, and we had our election in Fort Wayne yesterday, and he told me on Monday that he had a job as an election supervisor or a judge. It's quite complex. There are quite a few people in there, and I forgot to bring my driver's license. So there was a great discussion of what to do. Well, I asked the student how he got that job. And of course, you know the world runs on politics. You know somebody. That trumps all things. Now notice here, by the way, it says, we are called the friends of God. That means the person who is in politics and has a friend. That's the way the name of the game goes. You need a job, you got a friend. That's the way the name goes. You might not like it, but that's the way the game is played. It says here we're the friends of God, which means we have access to him that other people do not. We are his friends. And friends is, when you don't know somebody and you go to, you introduce yourself, you go through a certain formality before you do something. There's a certain polite thing you do. But when a person is a friend, you call him by his first name. You go in and you see him when you want to see it. We are the friends of God. That's what the word our Father means. Abba. I wouldn't want to ever address God as Dad or Daddy. That's beyond me. I think you have to keep the transcendence in there. But this is what it says. We are his friends. And therefore, if you have this puts a new dimension on prayer. Because we're not speaking to a God who has to be convinced. We don't go through any number of saints to gather up points to get closer, to get closer. We have direct access. We have direct access to God at all times. So in our gospel appointed for this particular Sunday coming up, we have a number of avenues in which we can approach this particular pericope. Now, one thing which I think is which has been very useful to me is that I have an opportunity to work or hear the gospel for the next Sunday 4 times a week. And one thing that I have learned is that there are various ways to look at a particular gospel, and every preacher takes out of the gospel what he wants to take out. I'm not so sure, but I'm convinced it's really impossible to preach the entire pericope. So here in this particular gospel, we have any number of ways or directions we can take. First of all, you have the Trinitarian direction of the relationship between the Father and the Son, which is defined as love. You might want to save that for Trinity Sunday, but if there's any area which I think should be expounded more, it should be of the Trinitarian concept. We move too quickly to the Christian life, justification, sanctification, without taking God into consideration. Now, the great value of this particular pericope, it goes from God's Trinitarian existence, whereby the Father and the Son love one another, to the Son's loving us, to our loving other people, and to giving our life in behalf of other people. Now here there's a connection to the Synoptic Gospels, because Jesus said, when he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He answered that the greatest commandment, we should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and and the second one, which is like to it, that it really means it's equal to it, you should love your neighbor as yourself. Here you have the same thought. Now the phrase, the command, you should love your neighbor as yourself, and we should love the Lord your God, is not law, but it's an invitation to believe in God with everything you are. It is not law. And so the love with which we love God and God loves us is extended through us to the love of the other people. Now the language is different than in the Synoptic Gospels, but the thought is exactly the same. This adds the new dimension, by the way, that we are the friends of God, which suggests that maybe a slight discourse or a word could be said about prayer, and that the person who prays to God is praying to his friend who is looking out for his best interest. Look at this passage. So that anyone who lays his life in behalf of his friends. His friends. It's kind of sad that Jesus calls Judas my friend. Kind of indicates that he was included in the atonement. Then here in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. Again, this does not suggest that our participation in Jesus, or our being in him, in any way depends upon keeping the law. It means accepting what he has said about us, and that we would love him with the same love that he loved us. Now, John in his epistles is going to pick up on that same thought. Now, here's this word command. It simply refers to a divine word. It has nothing to do with the law and the gospel. And if we're going to use those categories, it has to do with the gospels. The next one is an amazing thing, because what it does, it takes the concept of friendship and offers the antithesis, which is slavery. So, the slave does what he has to do because he's a slave. The friend does it because there is a close camaraderie between the heart of one person and another friend. In fact, close friends can actually read the mind of the other person and knows what he's going to do. There's a blending of the souls there. And even in a case, by the way, where there's a divorce, the husband and the wife have lived so long with one another that they know how the other person thinks before they act. The translations here do not translate the word doulos, douloi, right over there, as servant, where the word should be really slave. I do not know the reason why it isn't translated as slave. These people are not hired hands. A slave is not a hired hand. The slave can walk away anytime he wants to. I mean, the hired hand can walk away, as we know in the story of the Good Shepherd. He can leave when his life is in danger. The doulos is there, and he acts under compulsion. The Christian does not act under compulsion. He does what he does because he is a friend of Jesus. Now, I suppose some people might think that the way this would be the Sunday to sing what is a very favorite hymn of many of our parishioners, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Okay, I guess you should. It wouldn't be a bad idea. It's not high on the list of good Lutheran hymns, but it does suggest this idea, no doubt about that he is our friend. Now, verse 16, "You have not chosen me, I have chosen you." Now, one topic that does not come up very frequently in the in Lutheran sermons is the doctrine of election. I wanted to add one thing also that doesn't come up too often is the doctrine of the Trinity. This is the doctrine of election. It's not a bad idea to do that on occasion for this reason, because the Protestant culture in which our people live is strongly influenced by people making decisions for Christ. A week ago, I was with the Southern Baptists down in New Orleans, and that's very big with them, that what is the proper time to make a decision for Christ. And according to our discussion down there, a person could make a decision for Christ when he was 4 years old, a better decision for Christ when he was 18, and really a great confession for Christ or commitment for Christ, a decision for Christ, when he was 64. Well, I think that indicates a problem right there, because we are what we are because God has elected us in Jesus Christ. And here it is quite evident. He says, "You have not chosen me." Now this, "I have chosen you," this would be a great passage to use at a rally, at a Billy Graham rally or any kind of rally, because this contradicts that whole philosophy. "You have not chosen me, I have chosen you." And it goes on to say, "I have put you in a place that you will go and you will bear much fruit, and your fruit will remain." And your fruit will remain. What you do will remain. It won't be here today. It won't be here today and gone tomorrow. And now comes the question. Here's a passage at the conclusion of the Gospel for Sunday that, if taken out of context, can come to a conclusion which is exactly the opposite of what is intended by Jesus. It says here that whatsoever you ask, the fruit remains in you, so that whatsoever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. Now, I know there's one television speaker who, and this is not new, by the way, Norman Vincent Peale did it. The Crystal Cathedral fellow, Robert Schuller, did it. And now he is doing it now, that God wants us to lead an abundant life, and that there's many things for us many things in the world at our disposal, and with the right kind of faith, all of these things will happen to us. If you will notice that within the context of this particular passage, the reference of asking the Father for anything at all is in the context of our giving our lives for Christ. These words are spoken within hours of Gethsemane. These words are spoken within hours of Jesus' arrest, his trial, his crucifixion. And so it's in that context that the Father will assist us. Now, going back to this hermeneutical principle, these words were remembered by the disciples. If these were spoken on Thursday night, these words were in 3 days understood within the context of the resurrection of Jesus. And on this count, the church with good reason has appointed these readings as the official gospel readings, even though they were spoken before Good Friday, after resurrection. And so with those words, we conclude our discourse on this. Thank you very much.